Garry Kasparov, the Russian grandmaster, dominated chess for 22 years until his retirement in 2005. In January 1990, he made history by exceeding Fischer's peak rating of 2785, becoming the first to reach 2800. With a peak rating of 2851, he is still considered as one of the best chess players in history. But what happened when Garry faced a 13-year-old chess prodigy, none other than Magnus Carlsen, who was rated 2484 at the time? It was like watching a lion challenge a mouse. Hold on to your chessboards, folks, because Magnus is about to give Garry a run for his rooks. Magnus initiates the game by advancing his pawn to d4, known as Queen's Pawn Opening, and Kasparov replies by moving his pawn to d5. Magnus proceeds by moving his pawn to c4, known as Queen's Gambit. In response, Kasparov opts for pawn to c6, a move widely recognized as the Slav defense, often employed as a defensive response to Queen's Gambit. As the game unfolds and they continue to develop their pieces, Kasparov shifts his knight to d7, leading the game towards a Queen's Gambit decline scenario. Magnus advances a pawn to e3, aiming to fortify his control over the crucial central squares, widely regarded as the most strategically significant areas on the chessboard. However, Kasparov counters by shifting his queen to a5, creating a pin on the knight positioned at c3. Magnus finds himself compelled to address the pin by relocating his other knight to d2. However, this move comes at a cost, as the knight can no longer exert influence on the central squares. In response, Kasparov reinforces the pin by advancing his bishop to b4, once again putting pressure on Magnus's knight. In a bid to safeguard his knights, Magnus moves his queen to c2, consolidating the defense. Both players then proceed to castle, securing their respective king's safety. Feeling that the moment is opportune for an aggressive move, Kasparov decides to capture the pawn on d4, seizing Magnus's pawn and asserting control over the center. Nevertheless, Magnus retaliates promptly with knight to b3, executing a fork on Kasparov's queen and pawn. This move forces Kasparov to retreat his queen. They trade their pawn, which allows Magnus to position his bishop advantageously on c4, strengthening his position. Just as these chess pieces are dancing on the board, it's time for you to make a move as well. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up for more exciting chess action. At this point, both players find themselves in a fairly balanced position, with the slight advantage tilting towards Magnus. However, the clock is ticking, and time is running low. Kasparov decides to withdraw his queen, moving it back to c7, possibly looking for a safer spot on the board. Magnus seizes the opportunity to activate his rook, a strategic maneuver to improve his piece coordination. In response, Kasparov advances his kingside pawn to h6, putting pressure on Magnus's bishop, forcing it to retreat. And Kasparov quickly slides his bishop to d6, putting an x-ray over the h2 square. Now the situation takes an intense turn. Magnus's king is left in a precarious position, vulnerable to a potential check if Kasparov can somehow maneuver his queen to h2, leading to an instant checkmate in the end of the game for Magnus. Thankfully for 13-year-old Magnus, he spots the danger and advances his kingside pawn to h3. This move adds a layer of complexity to the game as both players navigate the increasingly tense and intricate position on the board. A few moves later, Kasparov makes a decisive move by placing his bishop on h2, delivering a check to Magnus's king. Magnus is compelled to move, as capturing the bishop is not an option due to the direct threat posed by Kasparov's queen on the same square. In response, Kasparov maneuvers his knight in front of his queen, creating a tactical sequence that allows Magnus to capture the bishop, resulting in a trade of pieces. With the game evenly poised, 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen goes on the attack, boldly moving his queen to c5 and pushing multiple pieces forward, targeting Kasparov's vulnerable c6 pawn. The stage is set for an exciting showdown as both players gear up for a potential clash. After a couple of moves, Magnus Carlsen takes the initiative and captures, leading to a series of piece exchanges. In the process, Carlsen gains a material advantage, specifically winning the exchange. Simultaneously, he pressures Kasparov by threatening to trade his knight for the rook positioned on d8. This forces Kasparov to move the rook to safety. As the game goes on, Magnus continues to play actively and aggressively against the current world champ. The excitement builds up and things become even more interesting. Kasparov makes a move with his queen and threatens to check Magnus's king, but Magnus quickly moves his queen to g4, offering a queen trade. Kasparov agrees to the queen trade and emerges with a slight advantage. This advantage is due to Magnus now having 2 pawns stacked on the same g-file, which isn't the ideal pawn structure. Kasparov goes on the offensive, moving his rook to e1 and proposing a trade of rooks. They're now approaching the endgame, and Magnus enters it with a 1-pawn lead over the world champion. A few moves later, both players keep their pieces active, delivering checks to each other and making precise moves. They leave no room for errors, displaying their accuracy and maneuvering their pieces on the board. The game intensifies as they engage in this close and competitive battle. Carlsen makes a strong move by moving his rook to h1, checking Kasparov's king, forcing it to move. Magnus slides his bishop to c5 and Kasparov counters by moving his rook to b2, posing a threat to capture a pawn and compelling Carlsen's king to retreat to g3 to defend. As a few more moves unfold, it becomes evident that a draw is likely imminent. Both players acknowledge the intensity of the match and shake hands, agreeing to a draw. This marks a remarkable achievement for Magnus Carlsen, proving to himself and the world that even at just 13 years old, he can go head-to-head with the reigning world champion Garry Kasparov and hold his ground.